If everybody could please find a seat, we will be beginning. Welcome to the People's Hearing on Nuclear Awareness. My name is Yogev. I will be the Emcee for today, and I will be facilitating us through a variety of different speakers we have coming all throughout the country, from local people bringing their testimony, their experiences, from researchers and scientists to scholars to lawyers, and people sharing about what is happening in Erwin, Tennessee, with Nuclear Fuel Services permit to enrich uranium at a highly enriched level being used for nuclear bomb material. We're here to give the citizens' perspective on nuclear fuel services, the truth as we know them, inconvenient truth to war profiteers, to government bureaucrats, to some in the public who don't want to believe the ugly truth about the bomb. The half of the program will focus especially on the $67.5 million proposal to purify uranium for the secondary stages of nuclear weapons, bomb making in our midst, bomb making for profit. We will weave together stories from residents of our area, downwinders, downstreamers, Erwin residents, with experts who have been assisting them in the struggles against NFS. Officials or their representatives in the audience? Any public officials or representatives? Anybody from Nuclear Fuel Services? Nobody here? We have requested the Erwin Citizens Awareness Network, ECAN, a local organization, requested a hearing directly from our nuclear regulatory agency. That hearing was denied. We have challenged that decision, and part of why I submitted a public comment for Nuclear Fuel Services permit to express my concerns. When I submitted that public comment, I received a draft decision that was accidentally leaked to me with the decision by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission that they had already decided to deny the hearing. That draft document was dated January 16th. The first comment submitted on the public docket was received on January 17th, one day after they had already made their decision. So that's part of why I'm here. I also invited the dozens. We had over 65 people submit public comments to the docket. So all those folks have been invited. Thank you all for being here to learn about what's going on here in the community and to bring awareness to this issue and to address it, to bring action. There are postcards on all of your tables. You can see one with a picture of President Biden, another with the statistic of 1 in 71 having an increased cancer fatality in the community of Erwin as a result of what is happening. That one is a postcard to the Department of Energy. We encourage you to look at those postcards and fill them out. Make yourself comfortable. There's the bathrooms and water right around the corner. I'm going to ask that each speaker come around on this side of the podium to avoid any cords. We'll also be keeping time. There's a little timer we'll have here for speakers. If you need to go a little over, we understand, but let's try to keep it. I'm going to try our best to keep us on schedule. That way we can get out of here on time. There will be a 10 to 15 minute intermission in the middle of the program, as well as afterwards. There'll be a social hour and food and drink and that kind of stuff. So get comfortable. We're glad that you're here and welcome. I'm going to introduce our first speaker is Landis. She is a board member of the Green Interfaith Network. She's a retired high school Earth Systems science teacher and climate change educator. She has a PhD in science education with a focus on climate change from The Ohio State University. And she's also a grandmother and concerned citizen and organizer of this event. And she's going to talk a little bit about the background of the work that we've been doing, as well as give a land acknowledgement for the land that we're currently holding this event on. So let's all welcome Carol.
Thank you. I thank you, Yogev, for the introduction to this place, and I can't thank you enough for being here. It is a gorgeous day, and you have chosen to spend your time here with us to listen and to learn. We were denied the hearing that was asked for, even though, as you pointed out, the public comments also requested that, and it was denied before the public comments were received and acknowledged. I did get a little memo that said I had submitted one, go team, but that doesn't matter if they didn't read it. So I'm a little irate. I'm going to try and work with that. Take some deep breaths. I would also like you to say that, I'm a former school teacher, so if you can't sit this long, and I'm not sure I can anymore, especially when I'm agitated, if you want to help yourself to some food or get up and get a drink or whatever, or stand in the back and pay or whatever, you do you. Yes, ma'am.
I have a point of a question. I thought we were planning on just to speak at a hearing, but there never was any hearing ever?
No.
And at this point, later on, you all will walk us through what we can do to try to rectify that.
Yes, I do. Yes. We have the attorney here who submitted the official count. Yes, thank you. In terms of background, and I didn't even put my own land acknowledgement, so I apologize for that. I would like to say that I'm a relatively new person here to this part of Tennessee, and I became aware fairly quickly of the impact of nuclear fuel services on this community. They are an employer. I know that I worked for school districts where I wasn't happy with what was going on, so I don't necessarily presume that every NFS employee is either aware or isn't concerned. I have to believe that there are some who work there who would prefer that it be different. So our concern primarily is that the location is on a small acreage. It's within a stone's throw of an elementary school and a town. There is an outfall into the Nolechucky River from which people in Greenville get some of their water. So, there are reasons for concern, and we believe that the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, the Atomic Safety and Licensing Board, should have wanted to hear what we have to say. So that's why APEC is supporting and sponsoring this event, and we are going to continue. So what I'm hoping you will do is, as you learn more, I'm hoping that you will choose to persist with us. Please do not go away. I am just thrilled with how many people are here, and I thank you from the very bottom of my heart, and I hope that you will continue with us. That's really important. I am neglectful in the land acknowledgement thing, and I'm just going to have to wing it, okay? So understand that I actually have something written out. But we, in this area, particularly here at the library, are in the watershed of Brush Creek. And Brush Creek flows into the Wapaga. So for those of you who are more local, you may already know where that water goes. As you know, all water goes downhill. The location of the plant and community that would be most affected is streams that feed in from North Carolina, and then it becomes the Nolechucky, and the Nolechucky goes into a reservoir that is Douglas Lake. And so we are all living on land that was initially the ancestry and heritage of this land was with the Cherokee people, also known as the Yuchi tribe. And I want to just simply acknowledge that we are here. And with that, I think I'm going to turn it back over to Yogev. Well, open with the prayer, okay? You will read it to me. your table is a postcard that this lovely minister, and we have Noel to thank for the graphic gift. On that card is the nuclear prayer that was written by the Right Reverend William. And this is from the United Religions Initiative. I'm going to read it, and you can read it in the beginning and the end of your hands, O creators of the universe. And in our hands, you have placed the fate of this planet. We, who are tested by having both creative and destructive power in our free will, turn to you in sober fear and in intoxicating hope. We ask for your guidance and to share in your imagination in our deliberations about the use of nuclear force. Help us to lift the fog of atomic darkness that hovers so pervasively over our Earth, your Earth, so that soon all eyes may see light magnified by your pure light. Bless all of us who wait today for your presence and who dedicate ourselves to achieve your intended peace and rightful equilibrium on earth. In the name of all that is holy and all that is hope. Amen. I just also should have mentioned Green Interfaith Network is one of the endorsers of this. Please visit our website. It's greeninterfaith.org. greeninterfaith.org. And our mission statement is on the back of the card. And we share this belief. All faiths have a stewardship ethic. And so we just, Green Interfaith wants to bring that forward to sustainability.
To make this participatory as a public hearing, we're also going to be distributing, Bucky and Joan are distributing note cards that will go out to every table. Please take time to add your comments and your ideas. Anything that you put with a period will be a comment or an idea that you're submitting that will try to coalesce some of those ideas and put up on the flip chart paper. If you have a question, try to designate that by making sure there's a question mark somewhere on that note card. Also be giving all these, whether it's a comment or a question, to Joan, if you could raise your hand one more time. That's Joan. If you give her your questions and comments, then she will go through that, and we can then present your questions directly to the speakers after some of the speakers speak. So yeah, please, that's one way of having your voice in this hearing. Another way is during the intermission. If people feel compelled to want to share their voices, people can speak then, or after the formal program, all the speakers have spoken, then during the time of people getting food and refreshment, that's also an opportunity for all of you to come and speak as well. Over here will be a place where we can organize that. We have a
Camera set up, so anyone that wants to give a public comment will be collecting those on video right through those doors.
So please come to Eleanor or Aaron right through those doors during intermission to give them your comments that we will work to produce in a video that will disseminate out to the community. I would like to introduce Barbara O'Neill and Trudy Wallak, who are co-founders of the Erwin Citizens Awareness Network and the driving force behind ECAN and the efforts to prevent the Nuclear Regulatory Commission from granting the Nuclear Fuel Services License Amendment. So Barbara O'Neill and Trudy, come on up to the podium.
By the way, we are not the only ones. The three of us, Trudy, myself, and Linda Motivus were the founders of Erwin Citizens Awareness Network. Woo! And there was another lady that I don't believe she's with us here today, but did a
Dr. Sue Kelly, and she did a forensic work for ECAN. I feel like crying when she's not here. But anyway, my name is Barbara O'Neill. I was born 78 years ago in Erwin, Tennessee. I'm getting kind of old for this, and I'm so glad to see the young people like Yogev see what I've been learning. And I have put about 25 boxes of my research in the archives of Appalachia. Reserved for future generations. But at any rate, I lived in Erwin, I guess about 23, and then I moved, I worked, I was gone for 40 years. And I came back in 2004 to take care of my mother, and basically to build my dream house on the property been in our family 100 years. Well, I did that. I knew NFS was there, but I didn't know how bad they were. And so here I was, you know, trying to do everything, and I looked at the newspaper. I guess this was in 2007, the summer of 2007. I saw an article about a meeting down at River's Edge Restaurant. It had something to do with NFS and the fact that a lot of stuff had been kept from the public. And so I thought, I better check on this because I live pretty close. And so it was Linda and the Sierra Club that was having the meeting. And we found out when we went that she had gotten a call actually from a congressional staffer in Washington, D.C. And this congressional staffer had found her because he had seen her quoted in some article in the past. Didn't really know her. He worked for Congressman John Dingell, who you all remember, and Bart Stupak, and they were on the Government Oversight Committee. And this staffer said to Linda, you know, don't you know what's going on at NFS? And she said, no. And that's when she said, there's always something bad going on there. But he said, they had a big spill, you know, in 2006. And he said, and oh, by the way, everything has been kept secret from the public from 2004 till 2007. This was now 2007. So we found out about this spill, and Linda sort of hesitated. He said, don't you understand? It's a loss of containment. There were 9 gallons of high-enriched uranium spilled in the building. It trapped 2 employees inside, and it started running outside the room to another building that had an elevator shaft. And had that accumulated in that elevator shaft, it would have caused a nuclear criticality, which is nuclear chain reaction. So anyway, we got kind of excited about that. And at the time, Trudy Wallak was there, and I didn't know her, I didn't know Linda, I didn't know anybody there. But Trudy looked over at me and she said, you people in Erwin have got to do something. And here we are, 15 years later, still trying to do something. But one of the things I wanted to show you when Yogev was talking about his comments, I told Linda way back when, I said, we need to get a paper trail on this company. And so I learned to use ADAMS, the NRC public database. And I have researched this for years, and from 1974 to 2023, this is their violation history, 360 pages. Wow. Okay? And so this is what I sent to the NRC as part of my comments, along with a letter explaining it. And do you think they probably could have ignored 360 pages? I don't think so, but I never heard anything. I got an acknowledgement that they received it, and that was about it. In addition to that, Sue Kelly had done Erwin's nuclear nightmare timeline from 1957 to 2009. And the difference is she used a lot of newspaper articles. She did tons of research. She also used documents, too, from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. But anyway, the nuclear nightmare that phrase was coined by Congressman Ed Markey in 1986 when he had the congressional hearings on NFS. And so she used that for her history. So we're gonna put these over here, and if anybody would have shown up today from any congressional office, we were gonna give this to them. But unfortunately, we don't have anybody here, so I'm gonna put them on the table. You're welcome to look at them. Thank you. And then here's Trudy. She's the one that got me involved in this, so now she's got to go. I am not good at this. I don't like speaking publicly. I'm shy.
Yeah, but you look good.
I don't like sitting in the back of the room, so that's very hard to wrong. So, I'm Trudy Wallak.
They lost my microphone.
See, that's why.
Use your outdoor restrictions here.
I didn't know outdoor. Over there, that's the right tower. Just hold it, Trudy. Just hold it. It's not.
Can you hear me now?
Okay, let me try this again. So see, you can already see what prefaces my speaking in public. I'm Trudy Wallak. I live 28 miles downriver on the banks of the Radioactive River. And I say good afternoon to all you outstanding stewards, keepers, and fellow travelers. 20 plus years ago, I could have never imagined such a task and effort to protect those things in life that sustain us, we, mere visitors to this beautiful and sweet planet. Being naive and susceptible, I believe truth prevails by way of our government regulators, a simple mission I understood to protect and serve. Some days it seems only yesterday, others a lifetime ago. But then again, I realize 20 plus years added to one page can and does change things again. Upon my return to the area after approximately 25 years, I began my dream search, a waterfront home. The memory of that initial introduction to what would become
Such a stage for the great blue heron, appearing to barely skim the water surface, traveling upstream as the wood ducks flew opposite. Yes, I'm certain it was all in the great scheme of things. The message, I'm home. Shortly after purchasing my piece of heaven, I began to read newspaper articles about nuclear fuel services, areas markedly known for the territory of our brother and sister caregivers, keepers, the powerful Cherokee, and others. Within the boundaries of my gifted space, there remains much presence of their spirit. A bent tree stands at the water's edge, marking a significant location of long ago. Countless times I wonder, what must they think of my failed efforts to carry on? My attempts to be a successful custodian of their sacred grounds, water, air. The heart of the matter, the overwhelming injustices inflicted upon those before us, and now we the people, as the powers that be, time and time again, cut and paste, all is well. Contaminants, toxins, all within acceptable limits. Good old reference, man, circa the 70s, the architecture of governmental scientists in an attempt to measure safe radiation dosage. You all know that stoic 20 to 30-year-old healthy white male, 5'6", 154 pounds, of Western descent. A one-size-fits-all? rather hypocritical, I'd say, of the federal agencies, the EPA, NRC, and DOE. Despite evidence, it fails to adequately protect many groups. Reference man still reigns. The transparency of the NRC seems to have always held we the people hostage to the unknown. 20 years of public meetings held in Erwin, many traveling for an hour or so to make it. We soldiered on. Over time, it became more and more apparent to the concerned citizens that we must organize and begin the process of doing our own testing if we wanted to know the facts about our own drinking water. So we did just that. Erwin Citizens Awareness Network got busy, along with other concerned citizens. While there were numerous NRC public meetings whereby the citizens were dismissed, mostly ignored, one in particular I'd like to share. On June 24th, 2010, at a public meeting hosted by the NRC in Erwin, I addressed the staff with a simple question. If highly enriched uranium was being discharged into the Nolichucky River, complements of nuclear fuel services. There was absolute silence. No one said a word. Eyes darting, expressions blank, silence. I repeated, a simple yes or no will do. From the back of the room, a lady speaks gently. Yes, but it's within the limits. What a moment. The NRC speechless. When I questioned why any contaminants are allowed to reach our drinking water, the NRC staff member responded, because it would cost too much to contain. So I ask the same regulators today, might this $67.5 million, the existing contractual amount granted to nuclear fuel services to make bomb components, be sufficient funds to control and prevent further lethal contaminants be discharged into our mighty and sacred river? Might it be worthy of consideration in protecting the drinking water of multiple communities? Might it be time to stop the contamination 95 miles downstream? And in closing, may I add, reference man needs to retire and be replaced with that of a realistic individual, beginning with a child. Thank you.
Thank you, Trudy. That's a beautiful reminder of why many of us are here, is I think out of the love of the land, the Nolichucky, the water, for the safety of our community. Thank you, Barbara, for sharing all that history of the various violations and the concerns about the health of our community. So ECAN has been doing this important work in the community for decades, and recently with this permit being pursued by Nuclear Fuel Service for the highly enriched uranium, they needed help. And so they reached out to a lawyer by the name of Terry Lodge, and he graciously accepted their invitation, their request for help. Terry Lodge is a long-time environmental and civil rights lawyer from Toledo, Ohio, who in his 43 years and more of work has represented protesters opposing nuclear power, nuclear weapons, mountaintop removal coal mining, fracking, and its radioactive waste and war. He values the free speech, association, and protest rights of activists above every other constitutional right, and worries about the privatized censorship of dissent on corporate social media and the money equals megaphone problem amplified by the Citizens United court decision. Terry currently represents scores of activists opposing the Nuclear Regulatory Commission licensing of 2 supposedly temporary sent nuclear fuel dumps in Texas and New Mexico, has legally questioned the nuclear weapons implications of manufacturing high assay low enriched uranium, HALEU, at the Department of Energy plant site in Ohio, and is part of a working group to keep the corroded and dangerous nuclear plant on Lake Michigan permanently shut down despite attempts at a corporate bailout and zombification of the reactor. He also is privileged to the work of a small but tough outfit, the ECAN, the work that we've been describing here, where we're working for public health and dealing with the radiation leaks and nuclear weapons connections in the Nuclear Regulatory Commission license amendment case. Thank you, Terry, for being here, and you've got 10 minutes.
I realize now that I should have somebody else write my intro. That was way crazy. Anyway, I'm really thrilled to be here today for a lot of reasons. One of them is that yesterday I drove through a huge and dangerous windstorm 500 miles from northwest Ohio. I live near Toledo, and my dog and I undertook to make the trip. I had timed everything out. I was going to get here in 8.5 hours, and it was all going to be fine, except Mississippi was torn apart on Friday night, and the same storm pattern was ripping through Illinois, Ohio, northern Kentucky, southern Michigan, and a whole lot of other places east of there. Anyway, it was a very interesting drive down. However, when I got about 50 miles south of Lexington, finally, it was a sunny day. It was spring. It was 35 or 40 degrees warmer than Toledo. And so I started having a lot of food for thought. I got past my basic constant preoccupation, which is how weird it is being the same age as old people. And began to recall, I graduated from Vanderbilt. I know I'm sort of in Etsu and Big Orange country, but in any event, I left Tennessee in 1972. I graduated in 71 with extremely fond thoughts of the Cumberland Plateau, the Appalachians, the Smokies. I'd spent a lot of time in this end of the state because it is so incredible. And yesterday I thought, damn, this is the first Appalachian spring I've had in 50 years. And it was delightful once the windstorm was north of me. So, not just because I'm old, not just because we're experiencing the Anthropocene together, I just want to talk briefly about two problems and how they relate to NFS. One of the problems is we are facing the possibility of the end of the world, or the end of life as we know it, with nuclear weapons. We are facing the other possibility, and they may be interrelated, I hope not, of what I call the anthro-obscene end of the world. And we're not doing enough, if anything, about either. So the coming of spring, as I rediscovered yesterday, was so wonderful. When I go back, it's going to be difficult going back north, let me tell you. But as I discovered yesterday and was reminded, spring is millions and millions of little tiny acts that are combining, taking place. They're spontaneous. They are incredibly beautiful. They are mostly unknown to us, mostly not exactly experienced. What we see is the result. Seeing the wildflowers on the forest floor before the leaf canopy fills out, and understanding the stages in which things return. And it made me think a little bit about what's called the hummingbird or butterfly effect, which is also known as the black swan effect, which is I think it's a Buddhist concept, but I'm not sure, and I'm not very religiously educated, but it's the concept that a hummingbird's wings churning for a few seconds, gathering nectar, sets into motion things that we cannot see, cannot know, that ultimately, a year later, 10 years later, turns into a hurricane, turns into something enormously powerful. The vibrations are unforeseeable, but yet perhaps foreseeable. and I want to talk with you about developing your own black swan eggs. Now, one of the things in 50 years of anti-nuclear and other activism that I've learned is you're going to take a beating from lots of critics and lots of corporate-sponsored shills, lots of people whose interest is in not understanding and not listening and not paying any attention. So I learned a long time ago the wonderful words and the courage of William Lloyd Garrison, who in 1831 launched a newspaper. He was a famous abolitionist, and he wrote the sort of opening explanation of why I'm publishing this newspaper. And among these statements that he made were this, which I've taken great comfort from over the years. It's lonely being an activist. It's wonderful being in a room full of people who are similarly minded. But boy, is it tough sometimes. William Lloyd Garrison said, "I'm aware that many object to the severity of my language, but is there not cause for severity?" He's talking about the end of slavery. "I will be harsh as truth, as uncompromising as justice. On this subject, I don't wish to think or speak or write with moderation. No, no. Tell a man whose house is on fire to give a moderate alarm. Tell him to moderately rescue his wife from the hands of the ravisher. Tell the mother to gradually extricate her babe from the fire into which it has fallen. But urge me not to use moderation in a cause like the present. I am in earnest. I will not equivocate. I will not excuse. I will not retreat an inch. And I will be heard." So that's the famous part of his comments. The forgotten part is the last sentence of that very same paragraph, which I also enjoin you to take to heart. It is, "The apathy of the people is enough to make every statue leap from its pedestal and to hasten the resurrection of the dead." So, we're here to talk about turning back the tidal wave of apathy, about nuclear annihilation, about nuclear insanity, and NFS is part of that. My friend, and I would like to say colleague, but certainly ally, Michael Ketterer, is an example of one who is setting a nest of black swan eggs. We are left with very few weapons. Lawyers can file stupid little petitions that are easily shunted aside on behalf of people who know what the hell they're talking about, pardon my French. People who do incredible gobs of homework, gobs of documentation, people who know their community better than the people that are supposedly regulating safety in their community. But they're not heard. They don't give an inch. They're not heard, and the apathy of the people is enough to hasten the resurrection of the dead sometimes. So we have the example of someone who is donating an incredible gift to all of us and who is making it difficult to not expose the shame of the NRC as a regulator, of the corporation as an employer. I incidentally want to say another thing here, and I don't mean to impugn anyone else's motivation to oppose what's going on at NFS. My philosophy is not in anyone's backyard. Who cares about the jobs? Who cares about the jobs when you essentially have, when your community is on the map as having spikes in cancers, in having spikes in disease that are inexplicable unless you start listening to the scientific data. So people like Dr. Ketterer, to whom I'm grateful, and I'm not here to bury him, but to praise him. But that's the kind of black swan activity. I want to tell one more short story about the hearing. We tried to raise 4 different contentions. We were asking for a trial. They call it a hearing, but we were asking what's called an adjudication or a trial. And The NRC, pardon me, I have to move to the high-tech portion of the presentation, if it'll boot up. Basically, my incredible researchers gave me a host of sources, including industry newsletters, including local Oak Ridger articles, including the Steelworkers Local Union at NFS, all of whom had published statements. No, it's not going to be, it's not for prime time. I'll just read it to you. Do it the old-fashioned way. Thank you. In any event, the point of our petition was, among other things, there were 4 contentions raised. We wanted, under the National Environmental Protection Policy Act, NEPA, we wanted an explication in the environmental impact statement of where NFS fits in the long cycle of nuclear weapons material, whether it's mining the uranium or putting it through its various purification stages. We wanted some indication as to where the source material was coming from, because we know that this duplicates, the proposal would duplicate a production line at Y12. And Y12, I mean, that line has been there for years, and it is a matter of public record that they were making nuclear weapons material. And the Exchange Monitor and Defense Daily, these are insider newsletters that charge $3,000 or $4,000 a year for a subscription, and whose reporters are top of the line, claw competitively for proof and facts. These are industry newsletters that companies buy subscriptions to, and their information damn well better be accurate. And they're reporting that, oh, there's this new line going in Erwin, Tennessee at NFS, and it's going to be providing, it's duplicating a Y12 line, and it's going to be providing nuclear weapons material. So I cite, I don't know, 5 or 6 different sources in our petition saying, here's what's going on, and we think that the environmental impact statement needs to address the whole issue of your guys, maybe you were in the past making nuclear fuel for submarines, which is incidentally an interesting controversy, but now we know that you're also making it for bombs. And it's illegal, incidentally, for the United States or any other country to be replenishing, rebuilding, expanding, replacing the nuclear bomb arsenal. It's illegal. But the response that I got, and I will not go on long, but the response that I got from in my petition from the company lawyer was just little of amazing. Of course, this thing stops. I'm just going to read you a quote. This is from the corporate attorney representing NFS. To be absolutely clear, the license amendment request does not seek approval to conduct activities related to nuclear weapons. Does not seek approval. As noted in the license amendment request, NFS is a, quote, manufacturer and processor of specialty nuclear fuels, unquote. Indeed, nuclear fuel, and in the filing, fuel is italicized and bold-faced. Indeed, Nuclear Fuel Services is the name of the licensee entity. He's excoriating me. And as further explained in the safety evaluation report, the primary licensed activity is the production of nuclear fuel for the United States Navy. To the extent petitioner, meaning ECAN, meaning us, to the extent that ECAN claims or believes otherwise, it is simply mistaken. Lies, folks. Napoleon famously said, never interrupt your enemy while he's making a mistake. And so I wrote a blistering response that, again, recites all of the sources, and we had an oral argument. We did have a sort of a hearing, but not a trial, on whether or not to allow the contentions to be admitted, and the part of the oral argument that covered that was, retrospectively, I'm just sort of nonplussed. It was annoying and nauseating. There's three judges on a panel from the NRC, and the lawyer member of the panel briefly took off after the NFS lawyer about, come on, these people are saying this stuff's out in the public domain, and the attorney for the company keeps saying, but we're not. And the administrative judge says, but I mean, really, the Y12 line, weren't they making nuclear weapons material? And there's this long pause, and the attorney ultimately, from NFS, ultimately says, well, what we're doing is we're taking our orders from DOE to purify highly enriched uranium to a certain standard, and we don't ask what they're going to use it for. And to which I responded, so we have a don't ask, don't tell policy. Anyway, this is another black swan opportunity. People may have questions about what to do. I would like to say, besides reminding you not in anyone's backyard, and encourage you that should be the message, not we want the NRC to listen to us, we want the NRC to give us a better regulated plant, because it's obvious that they are not capable of that and will not be capable of that. They have permanently contaminated the community. When I saw, and I will shut up in a minute, I'm sorry, Yogev. When I saw Dr. Ketterer's report that there's plutonium, fingerprintable, 95 miles downriver, folks, within limits, and as Trudy so well pointed out, who sets the limits and who's the model for it, and what other ridiculous assumptions go on. When I think of the fact that we're talking about groundwater which continues to show up spikes of contamination even though there's supposedly been remediation, we're not talking about something that is fixable. It is only closable and expensively going to have to be tracked for a significant portion of the rest of time. So the black swan is that you're going to have to keep fanning your wings, and you're going to have to keep making as much noise in as many creative ways as possible. Start maybe by sending postcards. Go to collaring people individually at the NRC. Go to further things. Consider civil disobedience. Consider the confrontations at the public meetings are great. The problem is you get fewer and fewer of those the more they feel threatened and confronted. There's a host of things, and my last offering to you is, I want to give you my email address. There's many, many, many things to know about this, about the connection between small modular reactors, which is the great new prolific nuclear proliferation wave of nuclear reactors that's being bandied about. I want to give you my email address. I will be happy to respond to any and all questions, either for proof of anything I've talked about today. I can send you the transcript of the hearing that took place, the oral argument. Email address is lodgelaw, LODGELAW, all one word, @yahoo.com. And with that, thank you for letting me go so far over time.
Do we have any questions for...
the email people wanted to hear.
Oh, we want to hear the email one more time.
Okay. LODGELAW, lodgelaw, @yahoo.com. I'm sorry.
How is your last name?
What?
It's his last name is part of the email. So if anybody has any questions, if you could write them down on the card and give them to Joan. Joan, do you have any questions ready to go, or we're going to keep things moving and keep us on schedule?
I want to thank you. Oh my God.
Any questions?
As the questions get collected, and Joan will go through them, and we'll get back to that a little later. But next we're going to have Park Overall come up and speak. Park is a longtime environmental activist who has taken on the challenge against NFS for decades, an accomplished actress. Park is a downstream resident of Greene County and lives along the Nolichucky River, into which NFS pours nuclear waste. Park's insight into the need to stop the chemical contamination of the river, the source of the drinking water for Jonesboro, Greenville, and the surrounding counties, is her passion. Let's give a round of applause to Park.
Y'all may know my acting work. I enjoy this work a lot more. Let me be real clear. I'm going to tell an off-color story. I may be an actress and middle class, but I am a redneck from hell. I'm a redneck from hell. I'm a liberal redneck. Okay? Now, I'm going to tell you a story. I'm going to cuss in it because this is a true story. About 15, 20 years ago, Mary, Olson, Trudy, Barbara, Linda, we've all grown old doing this. We've grown old. Frances, still beautiful. I had a crazy mountain girlfriend named Rebecca Caldwell. And the daddy of them was, the patriarch was up here at Sandy Mush, North Carolina. There were dozens of them. And people would say to me, Park, why you hang out with her? You never noticed that girl was crazy after she wrapped her brains around that telephone pole in that car? I said, did you never notice she was crazy before? And Rebecca said to me 20 years ago, Park, I know the guard up there at NFS, he wants to fuck me, I'll go fuck him. And you get in there and get whatever you want. I am sorry I didn't take her up on it. Jail would have been cheaper. Getting a lawyer would have been cheaper than what I paid now. Dealing with the regulators has been impossible. I mean, I just FOIA'd for the well data of the North Side plutonium site. It's taken me a year to get it, and I still don't have the complete data, and that is a plume that is moving toward Flag Pond, Tennessee, and they all have wells, okay? So I'm just telling you, what we're doing ain't working. I've been doing it 20 years. These ladies have been doing it 20 years. Thank God I see 3 or 4 young people here. Thank you. Thank you. And to see a room full of this many people, thank you. Where have you been? We need you. Thank you for being here. Thank you.
I appreciated Trudy's question that she brought up, that she spoke at the 2010 hearing when when the Nuclear Regulatory Commission did grant us that hearing, and she asked them, is there uranium pollution in the Nolichucky River? And we know what that water meant to Trudy. I think there's no better person to answer that question. There's nobody that I would trust more than Michael Ketterer. Yes, let's give Michael a round of applause. Michael's going to answer that question for us in great detail. Michael studied chemistry at the University of Notre Dame and at the University of Colorado in Boulder, receiving his PhD in analytical chemistry in 1985. From 1987 to 93, Michael worked for the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency's Office of Enforcement, and therein developed interest in inductively coupled plasma mass spectrometry and isotope fingerprinting of contaminants in the environment. He has taught at John Carroll University, Northern Arizona University, Metropolitan State University of Denver, and at the University of Denver. Since 2000, Michael has been conducting studies of uranium, plutonium, and related contaminants of the environment using inductively coupled plasma mass spectrometry. He has published and lectured extensively on the subject and has analyzed samples from locations worldwide. 2 examples of current studies include characterizing plutonium dioxide particles in soils near the former Rocky Flats facility in Colorado, and fingerprinting off-site contaminants near the former Portsmouth Gaseous Diffusion Plant in Southern Ohio. Michael is currently Professor Emeritus at Chemistry and Biochemistry at Northern Arizona University, and may be reached at his email address that he can choose to share. Michael is fluent in Spanish as a second language and has been working knowledge of German language as well. So he comes with an impressive resume, and I will give you 15 minutes to speak. Thank you so much. Give him a round of applause.
Well, thank you to ECAN for organizing this fine event. And like others have said, I'm glad to see this room full. And I'm also glad to see a fair number of young people here too, because I look around in these circles and I feel like I'm one of the young ones sometimes, and I'm not that young either. And I feel like we have to train the next generation in these things. This is my email address here. Anyone is welcome to contact me there. This is subject to Arizona Open Records Act, so don't tell me anything that you don't want Big Brother to be reading. But, you know, say, could you give me a call or something like that, and we'll take it from there. So in my field, basically what I do is I follow the breadcrumbs in the environment near these nuclear sites. And the uranium fuel cycle is a good example here, sort of a cartoon version of the uranium fuel cycle. It starts out as uranium ore, and then eventually somewhere tails toward, you know, it doesn't show you what happens to the rest of the reactor stuff, but eventually we wind up there. I've been focusing quite a lot, as was mentioned in the intro, about the gaseous diffusion plants. Portsmouth and Paducah are the two remaining plants. Portsmouth in southern Ohio is under continuing decommissioning and deactivation, and also they're conducting open-air demolitions. But this is sort of the basis for making highly enriched uranium. At least this was done in the past, the gaseous diffusion process. And it's basically just a physical separation taking place by the rate of movement of the lighter uranium-235 containing molecules is a little bit faster than the heavier uranium-238 containing molecules. So this process is repeated over and over again. At Portsmouth is where they made a lot of the highly enriched uranium for the U.S. Weapons and fuel supplies, and there's a big chain of commerce formerly between Portsmouth and Erwin Nuclear Fuel Services. One of the things that I've really keyed in on is there's a problem in here that during the Cold War, the government was concerned there was a shortage of uranium. So they started recovering uranium from plutonium production reactors. And that introduces back into the gaseous diffusion plants these contaminants. Uranium-236 is a synthetic isotope. You get that, and that doesn't really do anything to the product, but these other elements behave differently chemically. And so in 1999, of course, the story broke that the workers at the gaseous diffusion plants had been exposed to elements like plutonium and neptunium, and TC is technetium. They'd been exposed to those things without their knowledge and without their consent and without proper biomonitoring. So my work in nuclear oversight is basically I use nuclear forensics methods. I use the same methodologies that are used at the DOE, Department of Energy, national labs. I read their papers. They teach me how to do what I do. And I use the same measurement technologies, and I'm considered to be an expert in this area. I would say I focus mainly on measuring uranium isotopes. Neptunium, NP is the symbol for neptunium, and plutonium. And there's a lot of places where enriched uranium and depleted uranium can be found, and it's very easy to trek. The trail of breadcrumbs is very, very easy to see near Erwin, also in Jonesboro, near Aerojet. But it's very, very easy to see the trail just looking at the isotope composition of uranium. And it's not difficult work to do. These are two sites that I really lose sleep at. Over GEPs, gaseous diffusion plants here. It's not contributing to the GEP by any means, those facilities. But I'd like to say that Erwin bears a lot of similarity to Portsmouth, and I know both places pretty well now. The same types of contaminants. Erwin is smaller in scale and more focused in size, but they are both highly problematic. And in isotope fingerprinting, which is what I do, I look at ratios of atoms, so 235, 238, the proportions of those two isotopes of uranium tell me, am I looking at some contamination that is from Erwin, or is it naturally occurring uranium? And we measure these using this technique of mass spectrometry. It's basically counting atoms and saying, how many do you have at this mass, taking the ratio, and there you go. We can see uranium-236. This is entirely synthetic. There's uranium-236 from nuclear fuel services. Anywhere you see that in the Nolichucky River, it pretty much came from NFS. We measure these ratios and try to interpret those. Here's an example of one of these machines. This is purchased in 2009. In 2010, I started using this instrument and another one to study samples from, specifically from the Erwin vicinity. So this is about the 5th or 6th trip here. In 2010, I met Trudy Wallak and Barbara O'Neill and Linda Modica, and I really got going in this area. And I've been captivated by the contamination that exists in the Nolichucky River Valley since I first learned anything about it. I'm based on generating evidence, taking samples, analyzing them, and making conclusions about and statements about contamination that are evidence-based. I like to say I would not say anything in a meeting like this that I could not defend from an evidentiary standpoint in court. I have testified in federal court and state court and things like that. I know what that's like. And I am evidence-based in what I say. And many times, many times, activists come to me and say, well, what about this? And I just look and say, nope. What you're thinking about just ain't so. And that is a very common situation. But all kinds of different media can be sampled. Ultimately, we can track things into human tissues. For example, people that inhale depleted uranium particles, they eventually wind up excreting depleted uranium, and you can be traced in their urine, and you can see that it's different than uranium from mineral water. Vegetation, surface waters, dusts, wipes, all sorts of samples. It sounds like very, very captivating and glorified work and really fancy stuff. It is not at all, my friends. A day in the lab is like working at McDonald's or Taco Bell, because lab work is hour after hour of repetitive operations, and it's pouring things and weighing things and waiting for things to drip through and getting nitric acid on your pants. You know, I have several pairs of what I would call in Spanish pantalones nitricos. They have little spots of nitric acid on them. So, here we are. This is one site. I've used this picture before to tell people where is the Nolichucky River, because you go to other places in the U.S. and they never heard of it. Nobody does. This story is not known on a national level. So what are some of the possible transport pathways of emissions from the NFS? There's point source discharges, for example, the outfall, the permitted outfall. There were discharges in the past to the municipal sewage treatment plant here, and then the sewage treatment plant sludge went here and there. There's previous and possibly ongoing atmospheric deposition, and then there's also groundwater discharges. The groundwater is discharging into the Nolichucky River. So here's a picture I took from 2010. This is the so-called plutonium building. And there is contaminated groundwater underneath this site, and it's kind of flowing and eventually discharging into the river. That's probably the major flux of contaminants into the river, is from that groundwater discharge. But here's the permitted outfall. We have sampled that. In fact, the first sample I analyzed from NFS, this proximity, was a sample of the water from that outfall. And I took that mass spectrum, which takes 1 minute, and I did not sleep for 2 days. I was so shocked to see what was there. What is the result? Well, there's highly enriched uranium there. This is a mass spectrum. I should have made these a little bigger, but this is a mass spectrum of naturally occurring uranium. You can kind of see this is a log scale on the vertical axis, but the heights of the stick figures there tell you how many atoms you have. And then this is what's from the permitted outfall, and the proportions are all different. A lot more uranium-234, a lot more uranium-235, and this new isotope uranium-236, which is from that recycled uranium stream. That shows up there too. So we confirmed, this is the late Alvin Higgins. He worked with us and helped us found a spring called Whaley Spring, which is near a discharge point from the contaminated groundwater into the Nolichucky River. So we knew we had found the spring because this was on an August afternoon. It was 88 degrees or so, as it is in this part of the U.S. at that time of the year in the afternoon, and the water that was coming out was 58 degrees. It's groundwater. I analyzed that. It contains enriched uranium. That is the end of the story. That is the end of the story. The enriched uranium is there. It's either there or it's not. It's based on the numbers. I call balls and strikes. I'm an umpire that calls balls and strikes. And if the ratio says this can't be from nature, it's enriched uranium, well, there's one place it could have come from. We made some trips down the Nolichucky River, collected sediments from Davy Crockett Lake. Those sediments are contaminated with plutonium and enriched uranium, and the plutonium is from experimental MOX, mixed oxide fuel processes that were done at the NFS in the past. There's a sample. This gentleman is Hartwell Carson. There's Trudy Wallak, who was with us that day. And there's some sediment which we analyzed, and you can find enriched uranium and plutonium that's specifically attributable to NFS can be found in this sediments. I'm not going to say high levels. I'm just going to say, in terms of concentrations, I'm just going to say it is there. Mollusks. These are calcium carbonate shells. These organisms take up their minerals from the water. There's enriched uranium substituting for calcium in those calcium carbonate structures. So the flow of the Nolichucky River goes some 95 miles south and west of Erwin, where the NFS is. It terminates at Douglas Lake, and in 2011, I remember the day well because I lost my glasses in the drink. And my wife still does not know that I lost my glasses that day, so don't you people tell her. We took sediment cores from where the Nolichucky River drains into Douglas Lake, and this is what you see. Here's depth in the sediment profile. This axis is the uranium-235-238 ratio. This is what you should see if it's naturally occurring uranium. This is showing us there's some deposition of enriched uranium right in the top layers of this sediment. It's coming as a dissolved substance in the water, and it's being associated and attached to the sediment particles and accumulating in that area. Here's another core, different core, kind of the same spot. The deposition looks a little bit different, but the message is the same. There's the enriched uranium. In the Erwin Cemetery, we took some soil cores from that area and found that, of course, there's enriched uranium in the soil, and there's also plutonium that is coming from this mixed oxide fuel process. It's not of global fallout origin. It is not from nuclear weapons testing fallout. Its isotope pattern does not match those sources. It is from the NFS. How do we know it's from the NFS? Well, this ratio is a fingerprint for plutonium, and this ratio is not consistent with nuclear weapons testing fallout. It is consistent with MOX, plutonium, and we also know that it is younger. So this is kind of a technical plot. This is what I would do if I was talking to a bunch of DOE scientists. I'd show them a plot like that and say, this is not fallout from nuclear weapons tests. If it was, it would plot along this line. It's up here. So it is not from nuclear weapons test fallout. It is a more recent origin also. So I read statements like this. This is from Tony Treadway, public relations representative for NFS. You know, if you really get into it, any well that you dig here anywhere is going to have background levels of plutonium based on, believe it or not, bomb tests. Well, I don't know whether to call that being misinformed or just kind of walking between the raindrops, or whether it's just a little white lie, or maybe it's an 1001 U.S. Code false statement. I don't know which to call it, but this is fake news. This is fake news. So here's some pictures from 2014, samples from sediments in the proximity of the linear trail, a little ways downstream. You can find enriched uranium and plutonium from the NFS in all of those places. So what do we do as an intelligent response, my friends? Well, we have to push back in the court of public opinion. We have to push back with regulatory agencies, private lawsuits, political lobbying, and I'm just adding a new one here to the picture. When people make false statements in public, record them on video, prove that they're false, go to the U.S. attorney and say, are you going to prosecute this, or are you not? And we need to tell the truth to the affected communities about the real cause of this slow violence. And community members, these government agencies are not here to help you, and they never will be. You have to take the matter into your own hands. You are responsible for monitoring your own environment. I'm here to help you. You have to take responsibility for monitoring and understanding your own environment. I really, really get offended with the idea of allowable limits, and I'm starting to not even like the word emissions. I'm going to say it's not emissions that are coming from NFS, it's excretion. This is excrement that is being put into the environment. And the process is excreting its waste without our permission. Allowable limits, well, I'll just take one more minute of everybody's time. I do not like sweet tea in the slightest. That would put me at odds with the local customs here. But allowable limits are, this is my water here. There's no sweet tea in it right now. And this is, allowable limits concept is rather like someone coming to me and saying, how much sweet tea am I going to be allowed to pour in your water where you will still drink it? That's exactly the situation. So, my friends, get busy on monitoring your environment. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Michael. So, ECAN was denied the hearing, the trial. The Nuclear Fuel Service's initial response was rejecting both ECAN's claim to be a party to the issue, as well as the claims, the four contentions as well. But the Nuclear Regulatory Commission at least did grant ECAN standing, meaning that ECAN is an organization of representatives of the community that is impacted by nuclear fuel service. And part of that standing is due to who I'm about to introduce, is Buzz Davis. And Davies lives about a mile or less from nuclear fuel service and has been an outspoken critic of what's happening there. He is a retired nuclear quality control engineer whose work and life experience gives him insights that no other member of ECAN has. Buzz has not only shared with ECAN his technical knowledge of nuclear material processing and the role of quality assurance. For years, he has also steadfastly told uncomfortable truths about NFS and NRC, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, to elected officials and to the public. And the fact is that Nuclear Fuel Service lacks a comprehensive quality control program. Please welcome Buzz Davies. Do we have Buzz with him? Is Buzz here? Unfortunately, Buzz is not able to join us today. But Buzz is somebody who has given us comments that were included in the docket, and we appreciate all the work that he has done. I'd like to introduce instead next Mary Olson. Give her a round of applause. Mary Olson was raised and educated as an evolutionary biologist. Her independent finding that ionizing radiation is more harmful to the girls of Hiroshima and Nagasaki who survived the 1945 nuclear strikes compared to the men and boys, that women were disproportionately affected, led her to involvement in her global work for the new treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons. And it's also to be found, she founded the Gender and Radiation Impact Project to encourage further research into why biological sex is a factor in radiation harm. Olson's worked with Nuclear Information and Resource Service as a radioactive waste specialist from 1991 to 2019 when she retired and turned her attention expressly to radiation. We thank you for your impressive career, and we will give you 15 minutes. Thank you.
What's the timer? Oh, goody. Thank you. I'm very glad to see this room full, as others have said. And I also want to acknowledge every single hour and sleepless night that the people in this room have contributed towards getting us to today. And it's a relay. We've already heard these impacts will continue beyond any one of us in this room. And so that's why it is so important that the tent is growing, that the outreach is reaching more people, and that we be welcoming. And I just want to say I feel so welcomed here recently, and when I've come in previous times. I used to live in Yancey County, just over the mountain down 19W. I lived right across the river from that highway, and when there was a proposal to put a uranium enrichment facility in Unicoi, I was very honored to come and meet people in that community, many of whom are here tonight, this afternoon, and be part of saying no. We don't want more nuclear activities in these beautiful valleys. And so I hold that up as evidence of victory, evidence of the power of the community to make a difference. And so I just want to say I believe that it's possible. We've seen it. So I'm going to tell you about a little bit more hope to start my presentation, and then I'll get into the radiation part. But I was at a wonderful bed and breakfast this morning, and I said, oh, golly, I didn't bring my photos. I need a photo of a sunflower. And my host provided this one from last summer. And it's long been the symbol of hope and a nuclear-free world. And now we have a new symbol of hope. And we're going to hear more about this treaty. And believe me, I support it being strengthened and broadened and made better. But it truly is, right now, the new symbol of hope. We have 92 nations that have signed a treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons, and most people in the United States haven't even heard about it, right? Not a word. So I just want to bring to your attention that it exists, that you can go to the United Nations website, you can find out which countries have signed. It's not a figment of an activist's imagination. It's happening. Wow! And I can proudly read one paragraph of it. I promise not to have a lot of words on the slides, but these words I am intensely proud of because they come out of work that I and a very small handful of other people have been
been doing. So it's the last part of this. But cognizant, this is in the preamble of the treaty, at the global level, in force in 68 nations today, cognizant that the catastrophic consequences of nuclear weapons cannot be adequately addressed, transcend national borders, pose grave implications for human survival, the environment, socioeconomic development, the global economy, food security, the health of current and future generations, and have a disproportionate impact on women and girls, including as a result of ionizing radiation. My own mother was lofty. She wasn't quite that lofty, but my mom didn't write this. A whole bunch of nations wrote it. And it got passed by the United Nations. And as I say, right now, 68 nations have ratified this treaty. And like the landmine treaty, it doesn't really matter if the United States ever signs it. If the rest of the world decides that nuclear weapons are not welcome in any way, shape, or form, then we will only have our weapons here. And I believe over time, even here, like nuclear fuel services, like Erwin, we will make new decisions. So, turning now to the evidence, and I'm just going to walk you through some background, and then we'll get to my finding, and yeah, I might take the whole time, we'll see. Jumped. Radiation is invisible, and to get with what Michael was saying, there is no safe dose. You can pour a little bit of that tea into his water and you don't see it. But as we walk through this, I'm going to tell you that every federal agency in the United States has in all of their stuff on radiation the statement that there is no safe dose. That's not me. That's the U.S. EPA, the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission, the U.S. Department of Energy. They all acknowledge it. Now, do they act on it? No. Now, here's the big thing. There's several ways that they cook the books. And one of them is to make a differentiation between external exposure and internal exposure. And all of the radiation regulations in the United States Nuclear Regulatory Commission's big fat, Code of Federal Regulations are based on external exposure. But both external and internal exposure are invisible, but both do the kind of damage to chromosomes that we see in my slide. And that is what we're ultimately talking about, protecting our genetic inventory, our treasury, and that of other life forms as well. So I just want to also mention that reference man, he's alive and well, and it's appropriate for workers. Most of the workers are male, and guess what? We're glad they're adult, right? We don't have kids working in nuclear factories. So for them, reference man is totally appropriate. What was not appropriate was taking no pause, no reconsideration, when those same regulations were applied to full communities with babies and children of both biological sexes and all genders. So this exposure, I'm going to talk about what happens to exposure of cells that are our body cells, our soma. But when they're reproductive cells, eggs, sperm, and their precursors, deformations are one outcome. This happens to plants, animals, humans. But we also suffer loss of fertility, which has not been studied in terms of broad-scale contamination like this area. Spontaneous abortion and miscarriage, possible heritable mutations, and avoidance of reproduction due to uncertainty. We know that radiation impacts children more. We're going to be unfolding this in several ways, but the very first detonation of a nuclear weapon was in New Mexico in 1945 on July 16th, the Trinity explosion, and I can't help it. I have to share that there was code language that was sent to Truman. He was already at Potsdam. He wanted to know, did it work or didn't it? And if it worked, the message was, it's a boy. If it was a dud, the message would have been, it's a girl. So we don't have information on the biological sex of these babies who died, but the spike in the New Mexico infant death rate was in the same year as Trinity, and previously the death rate of infants had been going down. And after Trinity, it went down even faster. But that year, there was a spike. And this was brought out by Bob Alvarez and his late wife, Kitty Tucker. You can find it in the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists. So, like Trinity, there have been over 2,000 tests on our planet. We've had a nuclear war even without the war. And these are not the plumes of the fallout. These are the locations of the detonations. So I want to just mention that there are impacts from radiation to our bodies, our soma, that are not cancer. I'm going to be dwelling on cancer. I know that it's very, very, very difficult to hear about it in this community because it's very personal. But I also want you to know that there are health effects that are not cancer, that have come from radiation exposure. This also comes, we're going to be talking about the A-bomb survivors. These numbers are from them because you have to look at very large numbers of people to talk about an excess. Because we know there's a lot of heart disease out there, and it wasn't all caused by radiation. But when you have a radiation-exposed group and there's an excess that you can document in a large number of people, then that's when we say, okay, that's due to the radiation exposure. So we now see as much cardiovascular outcome as cancer outcome amongst the A-bomb survivors from Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And this includes fibrosis of the heart and arteries, and also we see immune and autoimmune disorders, including things like multiple sclerosis. There's actually a long list, but it's important to know that cancer and also the reproductive impacts, just a portion. There is a much bigger range of impact from radiation exposure. And this is the slide that talks about that. The induction of cancer comes when, on this side of the slide, the energy and radioactivity is energy. We think about it as being particles and waves. Well, those are particles and waves of energy. And so when they impact our cells, which is the primary way, we don't get broken legs from radiation exposure. We get harmed cells. So that energy comes into a cell, and it can actually harm other things besides DNA. This picture shows the harm to DNA. And there's one piece I want to share with everybody. Our bodies can repair DNA damage. Every radiation exposure does not lead to cancer. Why? Because our cells have these incredible repair mechanisms. But the more times we're exposed, the more likely it is that the repair is not perfect or that it isn't repaired at all. So if a cell is really harmed, it dies, and the body absorbs it, and there's no bad outcome. But if you have a partially repaired cell, then you go to the picture on the upper right where you see an abnormal cell. And in general, cancer takes a second event, and so even all the abnormal cells don't necessarily result in cancer. But when they do, that's when you get tumor growth. So the piece that I want to share here is that it only takes one cell. Cancers start with a single cell. And so the more exposure or the higher exposure, the more likely. But sometimes you can get a fatal cancer from an exposure so small you can't even measure it. And so that's why we end up having to look at large groups of people, because you never know which one is or is not going to result in harm to a human being. So now I'm going to turn to the finding that I made in 2011. A woman in 2009 had asked me, is radiation more harmful to women? And I couldn't answer the question, but when I saw the reactors blowing up in Japan, literally blowing up, I realized I had to find an answer to that question. Dr. Arjun Makajani and his team had written a paper in 2006. It was never published except for on their website, and I never found it. So my mentor, Dr. Rosalie Bertel, sent me to the same data that they looked at. And it's all in this book by the National Academy of Science, so I didn't go out and collect any numbers myself. I just looked at the tables in that book. And it's all first-generation survivors of the U.S. decision to use the first nuclear weapons on cities full of people. And I always have to acknowledge that I feel great pain about this. I feel it was immoral and uncalled for, and that even the data itself constitutes a war crime. And the only reason that I continue to look at the data is because to ask questions about all ages and both biological sexes, you need a data set with those large numbers where you can ask those questions. And the survivors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki are, thank goodness, the only data set we have. We don't want another complete population of exposed individuals at that size. It's 100,000 people. So this is the only reason that I do it, because I believe that the answers here are vital to our survival. Now, I have blown it, and I only have a minute left, so I'm going to jump and give you the big news. We know that radiation is more harmful to children, but in those tables in that report, we find out that the youngest children got the most cancer. They were tracked by age groups, separated by male and female, and the data goes for 60 years. So in 60 years, we don't know when the cancers came, but they were counting total numbers of cancers in each age group. So we can look at it, and guess what? The most happened to the children, but the big news is that for every one boy, 2 girls got cancer over those 60 years, which in biological research is a real showstopper. You say, whoa, what's going on when you have a doubling? But stepping through it, there was still a difference between the adults. For every 2 men who died, 3 women died. And here's where you take the little scenario, and it's going to go off for me. I don't know what to do. Stop it. But I'm going to just take 2 more minutes, I promise. This is a scenario. This is not the data itself. It's what you can do when you have 100,000 people and you're looking at the excesses, and you have to kind of be a total believer that epidemiology is real to do this. I'm not, but I did it anyway. So the blue lines are the males, and the red lines are the females in a scenario of what if everyone got the same radiation exposure. They didn't. The survivors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki had many different levels of exposure. Dose reconstructions were done, and when you normalize the data, you can start doing things like this. What if they all got the same amount? So we can look at the biological sex and the age as what we're asking about instead of the level of radiation exposure. So on the bottom are the ages that they were in 1945, and each bar is 60 years of data. So you can clearly see that in every age group, females got more cancer compared to males of the same age when they were exposed. That the difference is largest when the exposure was to young children in 1945. And I can't really account for that middle space, but just to tell you that it's convenient, because the data that's in the left and the right of that middle space for the males constitutes reference man. That's the age group that the federal government who made reference man, who's just a set of parameters that they use to evaluate is this safe or is this hazardous, according to, well, turns out to be the most resistant, some of the most resistant part of our life cycle. So finally we get to the little girl. She's not a subpopulation, which the EPA thinks she is. She's an inextricable link in our life cycle. And nobody has funded the question, why? Why is there a difference based on biological sex? Why would that be the case? That research hasn't been done. So we need younger people to think about getting their MDs and PhDs answering these questions. It's a global underestimation because they haven't included it. And finally, the 3 points Radiation is more harmful to living cells. The harm is greater when children are exposed compared to adults. At any age, radiation is more harmful to female bodies than to male bodies. Young girls are the most harmed by ionizing radiation, measured as cancer across their lifetime. So we don't really know about the non-cancer effects, whether there's a gender difference. And quite frankly, we don't know about the eating and drinking. Is there a difference? Because the study that I looked at was all looking at just the burst from the bomb, that external exposure. So finally, these points provide strong evidence for the jurisdiction of humanitarian law over fission, most especially nuclear weapons. And it was this work that is reported in the preamble of the treaty. And I am so incredibly lifted with hope by that I bring it to you as an opportunity to just not feel like, oh God, we've tried. Yes, we've tried and we're getting traction, we're moving forward. If there are no nuclear weapons, there will be no nuclear fuel services. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you so much, Mary. I love the intersection between different issues and bringing in that understanding about the gender inequality is really something I learned, so thank you for that. We are going to move into a short break. So we're going to take a break for 10 minutes where we'll be starting again before 4 p.m. during this time. Feel free to use the bathrooms around the corner. There's food over there. Please continue to be writing your comments and your questions and be giving them to Joan. And we will be getting to those questions, I promise. We're just going to keep things moving with our speakers. Joan is over there. Also, if you're willing to give a public comment, please see Aaron or Eleanor over here. seats. If everybody can settle down and go ahead and find your seat, we're going to get started back up again. You'll find these postcards at your table. These are two different postcards. One is with three different postcards. One is to the President. One is to the Department of Energy. And then the third is a smaller postcard, and we're asking you to fill those out with your own information today, and go ahead and you can bring them up here. We'll start a pile on the information table, as well as take these postcards back to your community, and please share these postcards with your friends and family and different community members to continue to raise awareness. We can mail in what we collect today, or you can get it to ECAN or some of the other folks, and we can mail them off for you, or you can mail them off yourself as well. As we get started, once everybody gets fully settled in, we're going to jump right into questions, if we can get that started soon. For the rest of the second half of the program, we want to try to address some of the questions from the first half first, and then we'll have 3 more speakers, and then try to do 10 more minutes of questions, and trying to keep us on schedule to end the speaker portion by 5 o'clock, at which point we'll have some social time, be able to get more food and beverages, and open things up for public comment. But right now we will jump right into 3 questions that the audience has asked, and I'm handing the mic to Joan.
I've just chosen, a lot of questions were asked, but I'll start. Hello? Is that good? Okay. For Terry Lodge, why is it legally possible for any agency to deny a public hearing which NEPA guarantees the affected citizens?
All right. Question is, why is it legally possible for any agency to deny a public hearing which NEPA guarantees affected citizens? Because NEPA doesn't guarantee any kind of hearing at all. If an agency has in its regs that it will do it, you have to first see if it is optional. And if we're talking about the NRC, it certainly seems to me that the public comment session was very clearly required, but didn't happen. And of course, the NRC just basically says, oh, we're so sorry, we'll accept comments and we'll put them in the docket and make you feel good. But, you know, the problem is that what's your recourse? You're going to hire a lawyer to file suit in federal court to require the NRC to convene a couple of hour, what they do nowadays, of course, is all webinars. And, you know, a Zoom session where they control and, in fact, cut you off at 2 minutes or 3 minutes or whatever. So the problem is it's sort of an empty promise with very little enforcement potential except demanding and shaming. And I'm not trying to put down anybody who wants to be heard. I'm just trying to talk realistically, and I will do a 30-second presentation to remind people that we are living in an 80-year mountain of lies. We are living in a plutonium economy in some strong respects, where hundreds of millions of bucks have been thrown away for decades, now generations. And, you know, we're talking about something that's 80 years deep, or more, actually, depending on how you count it. And we're talking about having to do as much as possible to try to reverse that tide. And, yeah, I wish there had been a public comment session. I wish there had been a lot of things, but the NRC isn't willing to do them.
Don't go away yet, Terry. I think there may be need for you, because someone asked, do you represent clients in North Carolina? There must be a need here somewhere.
So this is what retirement was always going to look like.
Yeah, right.
I've represented clients and grassroots organizations in a lot of states, and I'm happy to talk to anybody. There are a few other lawyers that do this sort of thing. In fact, I am assisted somewhat in the NFS case by an attorney in Iowa named Wally Taylor, who's a longtime Sierra Club lawyer. The problem is always generational, and I would love to actually mentor or work with younger lawyers who are interested in messing with this regulatory hamster wheel.
Thank you. Okay. Mr. Ketterer, is he here or did he leave? Here you are. Okay. Is your report cited by Mr. Lodge available? That's the first, maybe short answer question.
I'm happy to make available anything that's already been made available to the public domain, and since Mr. Lodge used that in a petition to the NRC, it's already in the public domain, so either myself or Terry would gladly give you a copy. And I had another question from somebody else about SMRs, small modular reactors.
Oh.
But let me look at this
Okay.
one here. Where has your research and evidence had the biggest impact for change? I would say so far in Portsmouth, Ohio, near the gaseous diffusion plant. And we don't win, as Mr. Lodge has said. We don't really win, but sometimes we can set them back in their in the advancing of the steamroller that is going to flatten us. Sometimes we can advance, but I would say that is the best example. Portsmouth, Ohio. I think I have changed the course of events and bent the needle a little bit. Most places, I'm sad to say, not at all. But I'm doing what I'm doing because I think that positive change is possible. And then there was
Let's see the SMR question.
SMR questions. I had a SMR question that I put over there. Basically, one question was about our SMR, small modular reactors, are they safe? Well, I think that's an experiment that has not yet been done. And I think that's a question that we'll find the answer to in year 2100 or so. But it's an experiment that's not been done, so I don't really know how to answer that. And I think we have to be inherently cautious about technologies that we don't fully understand. And I would say, we are not perfect in building things that are fail-safe. There's a related question about the governor of Virginia wants to reprocess or process or make fuel at NFS. I have really no factual knowledge one way or another, but that seems logical. I mean, small modular reactors, one of the ideas of these is to make use of a lot of the highly enriched uranium that's sitting around from the U.S. and also the former Soviet Union. So I think there's more questions for Dr. Olson.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. Dr. Olson? The questioner asked, what about populations of workers exposed to radiation? Has that damage been evaluated? And then there's a second question for you here.
Two quick tags. I'm not a doctor. I have only an undergraduate degree, but I have 35 years of experience. So if anybody wants to give me an honorary doctorate, I'll take it. Second quick tag, small modular reactors are fission. Fission is not new. We know what happens from fission. Millions of times more radioactivity that will result in exposures to people, whether workers or not, and therefore I don't think there should be any question about whether this is a safe technology. Can you make something safer? Yes, you can make something safer. Can you make it safe? No. Okay, so the question on workers. We have very strong research done on worker health that shows a 1 in 4 rate in nuclear workers for cancer. I don't remember right now whether it's cancer or fatal cancer. I have to look it up. But that is certainly higher than the general population. So forgive me that I don't have those numbers and citations because I've been focusing on the disproportionate impact on women. There are more and more women in the nuclear workforce, so we're going to see numbers associated with adult women. Thank God there aren't little girls. So, yeah.
People of the Bikini Atoll, or this sort of musing on the gender differences?
Great, wonderful, thank you. So, absolutely, you know, I love my colleagues who work on climate and who are really focusing on excretion of carbon into the gutter that we call the atmosphere, which has become the gutter for the carbon industries. We have to say that that's a good picture because they go forward with the idea that every single respiratory illness is due to that. Now, I'm not going to tell them they're wrong. I'm going to say we need to start saying that a very high percentage of the cancer in the world is due to the atmospheric nuclear weapons tests and every single facility that's putting out radioactive pollution. It's a nicer word than excrement, but, you know, the same idea. And so it's really unconscionable that someone would come to Erwin, Tennessee, and I'm so glad this is coming up, and start on a study, the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission, under some history that I'm not being able to pull out right now in short form, but essentially working with the National Academy of Science, was going to do a study of the licensees, and they chose 8 pilot communities, and Erwin was one of them, and I truly personally believe, now this is me expressing my own opinion, but I believe that they were so shocked and horrified by the extent to which Erwin has been decimated as a community that they canceled the national study. They said that $4 million was too expensive. $4 million for a national study? No, they were shocked, okay? So here's the thing. The work that I've done, the work of the National Academy of Sciences did to produce that blue report, we don't need to have new studies. We have the answers. Radiation is harmful, and it's harmful depending on your age and your biological sex. We don't need new studies on that. We need new studies on why. Is it so with internal and external exposure? Is it so with non-cancer outcomes? Is it so with other aspects of the whole picture? There's plenty of research to do, but we should be right now saying it doesn't matter that the Marshallese are a small group. It doesn't matter that the people at Erwin are a small group. We know that radiation harms people, and we don't have to prove it again. So when our colleagues go around saying that every asthma case and every bronchial case is due to coal plants, they're wrong. But I'm sure as hell not going to say that. I'm going to say we need to start claiming the rebuttable presumption that every single cancer is due to a radiation exposure unless they prove it otherwise. So, yes, the Marshallese have been decimated. No, they don't have a normal birth. And finally, yes, these are all good research questions. Does it have to do with more fat in the body of a woman? Maybe. We've got to test that. Does it have to do with more free stem cells? Is another hypothesis. Maybe. We have to test it. And if you read my paper, which I have a few copies here, there's a long list of hypotheses that could be tested by good scientists. so now we need the money. Tell NRC to go tell NIH to do it.
Yeah, right.
Thank you, Mary. I was talking to Mary over the break, and our postcard, the 1 in 71 number, is for folks that look like me. That's men. So for women, 1 in 23. For girls, 1 in 10. So thank you for all that research that you've done, Mary. That way we know that. For women, 1 in 23. For girls, 1 in 10.
We need to kind of interfere from this moment.
Yes, I will introduce next Miss Frances Lamberts. Frances has been working to protect the Nolichucky River, endangered species, and wetlands for decades. Years before ECAN, she helped from the Friends of the Nolichucky River, recognized by the Tennessee Clean Water Network for her steadfast efforts. Frances is also a climate activist who formed the Citizens Climate Lobby group in our area, which is now being led by 2 of this hearing's organizers, Shelley Stallman and Norma Morrison. Thank you all. A prolific writer of not only weekly columns in local newspapers, Frances submitted comments to the Atomic Safety and Licensing Board. Please welcome Frances Lambert. Yeah, and you have...
I can't speak very loud.
You have 10 minutes. You can look at the timer there. Thank you.
So, I was told Linda wanted me to read my comments. I was one of the many people who wrote comments to the Atomic Licensing Board. Dozens of people wrote to them asking them for a public hearing, and I happened to be one of the people who did so. So I will just read you my comments. To the Atomic Licensing Board. In the 1990s, a freshwater mussel, the Appalachian elk toe, which had been common in the Nolichucky River, became federally listed for protection, being then critically endangered. Surveys by various agencies involved, the Fish and Wildlife Service, TVA, and others, had found only 8 live individuals after years of monitoring and searching, and none upstream of the Nolichucky Dam. Although sedimentation from mining on one of its headwater streams in North Carolina and industrial waste and land use and other changes were among the causes of the severe water deterioration, so were industrial waste discharges into the river. These have included, since decades, a large number of chemical and radiological pollutant effluents, potentially from leaks or accidental spills, or allowed under the diffusion theory water permits to the Nuclear Fuel Services plant situated in what was then the dead zone for the mussel. The waste's long-lasting and often highly toxic effluents containing substances like radioactive poisons that are not naturally found in water is known to affect human health too, not only through cancers, but also through radiological and other cardiovascular and other diseases. It clearly passes off a heavy exposure and healthcare burden and the water treatment cost burden to downstream communities. The facility's waste outfall in the Nolichucky River is only a short distance upstream from my town's water intake. And in the urban community, which receives part of its public water from wells near the grounds of the NFS facility, there have long been strong concerns about high cancer incidents, and a study related to this by the Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry some years ago found the facility to be an indeterminate public health hazard.
based on past operating conditions at the plant. The Nuclear Fuel Services License Amendment application appears to me like a case of simple rivalry with a long-established other facility, the Y-12 weapons plant in Oak Ridge, for materials production in nuclear war fighting. But that, namely nuclear war fighting, as we know, could annihilate human civilization and perhaps even most life on Earth. I would remind the board of Atomic Licensing Board of the fear stated by President Reagan in a White House document in 1985 that our vulnerability to the effect of extreme and long-lasting atmospheric disruption through a nuclear winter was not, quote, currently a part of the understanding of nuclear war, though it would likely mean, quote, the total loss of human agricultural and societal support systems and the loss of almost all humans on Earth, unquote. That's President Reagan. It led him and the then Soviet Union President, Mr. Gorbachev, to negotiate the INF Treaty, leading to destruction of an entire class of nuclear weapons. But we now see ourselves and the world threatened by the scientific advances which during the 20th century saw the first use of atomic weapons. And we now see and the establishment of nuclear power generation in the 20th century. Now the surrounds of the largest nuclear plant in Ukraine have been repeatedly attacked in the current war there. It is active. It is a current threat. In response to what Putin, in raising the specter of another Chernobyl, President Putin has threatened in response to what he perceives as, quote, threats to our country, action by Russia whose, quote, consequences will be such as you have never seen, unquote. This warning and several related actions have been understood widely as a threat to go nuclear. Rightly, therefore, the Union of Concerned Scientists points to the possession of nuclear weapons, of nuclear arsenals, as a potential incitement to conventional war, given justified fear of the horrendous humanitarian and environmental and the catastrophic effects of any use of these weapons. We are all facing a growing risk of nuclear war. We see proliferation of nuclear weapons and generally a renewed arms race in the nuclear weapons states. In the context of these threats, more weapons material production in our neighborhood with license for such to a private for-profit firm is ill-advised and unacceptable to me as a concerned local citizen. And so also is it unacceptable is the potentially redundant production of nuclear weapons-related material seemingly in competition to the long-established Y-12 facility. In the context of the treaty for the prohibition of nuclear weapons, which is now established in international law, I therefore plead with the board that the license amendment applied for by Nuclear Fuel Services at the very least have a requirement of quality control and materials processing safety standards such as are required at the Y-12 plant, and that such a license only be considered after a publicly available environmental impact statement has been conducted and a public hearing be granted. Purity of our air and soil and life-giving waters is critically important to our health, as to that of the aquatic creatures, which, like the Appalachian elk toe, are now our best indicators of good water quality. I would have it, the Appalachian elk toe, and other creatures of the web of life that are now very rare or endangered, have it restored, and any new radioactive or other poisonous discharges to the Nolichucky River be prohibited. And I thank you for considering my comments and my plea. So we know what happened. Yeah, that the request, which I take under NEPA, that affected citizens or concerned citizens be given a chance to express these concerns and hear what the agency has to say, simply denied. And so, yeah. Yeah. Okay, I'm in time.
Thank you, Francis. Our next speaker is Patrick O'Neill. He's the father of 6 daughters and 2 sons. He and his wife, Mary Ritter, co-founded the Francis Charlie Mulholland Catholic Worker House in Garner, North Carolina in 1991 as an intentional pacifist Christian community that works to uphold the consistent ethic of life. Patrick is also a journalist, writing primarily about religion, peace, and social justice. His peacemaking efforts include extensive work opposing nuclear weapons, abolition of the death penalty, supporting immigrants and the prison abolition. He is involved in the North Carolina-based Moral Monday movement, the New People's Campaign, or New Poor People's Campaign, Black Lives Matter, North Carolina, Stop Torture Now, and other anti-oppression and anti-racism efforts. Let's all give a warm round of applause for Patrick O'Neill.
Thanks, everybody. I want to introduce my wife, Mary Ryder, and my daughter, Mary Evelyn, sitting back there. Mary is the woman who was pregnant for more than 6 years and nursed for more than 15. I call her the goddess. She gets her feet massaged anytime she wants. Looking at the credentials of my esteemed co-panelists, I'm guessing that combined, the other 4 have probably about 40 years of higher education combined. And Mary Olson just said she went to college and also spent 35 years self-educating. So I'm going to say I'm here as a college dropout. The role that I play here, believe it or not, Ripley's Believe It or Not, I'm here to recruit any of you who want to go to jail and prison. That's my job here today. I'm gonna invite all of you to partake of nonviolent direct action and resist the madness that my co-panelists and other speakers are talking about. It's hard to believe that we're gathered in a library here in this small eastern Tennessean town, and we're discussing the end of the world. I mean, Terry got up here and he said, we are facing the possibility of the end of the world, or at least life as we know it. So, I mean, why are we discussing the end of the world? I mean, aren't there better things to do on a lovely day in the spring in the mountains than discuss the end of the world? So I don't want to be a total bearer of bad news. By the way, the bishop this prayer we read at the beginning, the nuclear prayer, I think should be renamed the anti-nuclear prayer. So I want to say I've been an activist for more than 40 years. I went to the Pentagon to do my first witness there in 1977 when I was 21. I'll be 67 tomorrow. That's when I met Philip Berrigan. For those who don't know Philip Berrigan,
He was on the cover of Time magazine with his brother Daniel Berrigan in 1971. These two Catholic priests were literally as important to the peace movement as Martin Luther King was in the 20th century. They really changed the whole way in which religious people resisted war and violence. It was a pretty amazing thing, and I was really lucky to have Phil, who died in 2002, as one of my mentors. And I have spent more than 3 years of my life as an activist in jail and prison for acts of resistance, mostly to war and nuclear weapons, but also for other issues that I've been involved in protesting. But I want to say, you know, I don't want to make any big deal out of that. 3 years, you know, my wife had a harder time. I spent 2021 in prison, pretty much during all of COVID. That year I was in federal prison, and it was much harder work for my wife to hold down the Catholic Worker House than it was for me to be in prison. I mean, prison to me is really just a change of address. I get along very, very well when I'm in jail with other prisoners. I get along well because they understand why I'm there. People who are the victims of this oppressive culture of ours understand the work I do very, very intimately and well. And in the prison I was in Ohio in 2021, you know, I immediately got very, very close to the African American community of guys there, and I was the only white person invited to the Black Prayer Group Circle, and was welcomed with open arms from my brothers there. And I am a civil rights activist. I've interviewed civil rights activists dating back to Shirley Chisholm and a lot of others, Martin Luther King III, Coretta Scott King, her daughter Yolanda, Andrew Young, Angela Davis. I've had a lot of opportunity to interview a lot of great, great civil rights activists. Will Campbell, a white one. But anyway, I don't want to make a big deal out of the time I've spent in prison, because I want to invite some of you to join me. Claire Hanahan, you know, she can give you the women's perspective on federal prison. I can give you the man's. Anyway, but I want to give you a quote from Phil Berrigan that really is important. I was sitting in a jail in Orlando, Florida in 1984 after being involved in a break-in, that's what they called it, a break-in, at the Martin Marietta plant in Orlando that was manufacturing both Patriot missile launchers and Pershing II missiles. Pershing II was nuclear. And I got arrested with 7 other people there, and Phil Berrigan was really the one who organized that. He's what we call unindicted co-conspirators. Plowshare actions involve a lot of planning, and a lot of people join in that don't go to jail, they just help. But so the Orlando Sentinel sent a reporter up to Baltimore, where Phil lived with his wife, Elizabeth McAllister, who was just my co-defendant and went to jail with me in 2018 for the action that we did that I ended up in prison in Ohio. But anyway, Phil gave a wonderful quote to the reporter. The reporter said, "How long have you and your wife spent separated by one or the other being in prison or jail?" And Phil said, "Half their marriage." Now that was back in 1984. Phil did a lot more time after that, and Liz is still doing time. But the quote that Phil gave to that reporter, you know, not written down, just off the cuff, was one that when I read it in jail, because the Orlando Sentinel came into the jail, they subscribed to it, which was nice to have it in the cell block, and he said, "We don't want to appear heroic. The sacrifices which people make for war every day are far more grievous than what we have done." Okay, I'm going to say it again. We don't want to appear heroic. The sacrifices which people make for war every day are far more grievous than what we have done. And we need to put that in context. If Joe Biden decided to send troops into Ukraine, he'd have tens of thousands of willing teenagers who would be willing to go off to this war because they've been brainwashed, but they would be willing to die for this madness, this human madness of killing each other. But the government would have them, and they would all go off and die. That puts into perspective the work that we have to do. We're up against a bunch of people who are literally out of their minds, literally speaking. I mean, who wants to send their 18-year-old child off to fight in some obscure place? I mean, nobody thinks about it. It's a total, absolute brainwashing. And this is exactly what the military-industrial complex does. It doesn't want us to be in any way, shape, or form apathetic or knowledgeable or caring about any of these issues. We're here having this gathering, this people's hearing, because there is no government hearing. The government didn't want anybody to know about Erwin, right? That's why we're here, because the government didn't want anybody to know. And that's the way the government operates. They're doing absolutely unbelievably horrific things, and they don't want anybody to know. So that's what our job is. Our job is to speak up and tell the truth. Anybody who thinks this war in Ukraine has anything to do with defending the Ukrainian people against Russia, you're absolutely wrong. The motivation, the single only motivation of our government fighting this proxy war is money. Look, a lot of you aren't going to believe this. Probably a bunch of you are brainwashed Democrats. It's all about money. You got to, I mean, if you think for 1 minute this is about the defense of the Ukrainian people, our government could care less. Now, we in this room care about the Ukrainian people, and we care about the Russian people and the poor Russian soldiers and Ukrainian soldiers who are being exploited by this. Absolutely unnecessary war. But our government, the military-industrial complex, could care less about the Ukrainian people. This is about money. All those billions of dollars worth of hardware, horrific weapons that Biden is sending to Ukraine is just so all those military contractors can build more weapons. This is about building weapons of war. Why we can't stop the nuclear arms race is there's money attached to it. Every time a corporation builds a weapon, they get paid unbelievably, incredibly huge amounts of money. And that's what we're up against. And you've got to get it out of your minds that anything that this government does is by any stretch of your imagination humane, caring, honorable, or loving. This government has to be opposed with all your heart. Now, if I asked how many people here were Democrats, a lot would raise their hands. If I asked whoever were Republicans, maybe 2 would raise their hands. How many are unaffiliated? I would raise my hand. I'm a Christian pacifist. If anybody asks me, I'm a Christian pacifist. But understand something about this government, okay? And it was when I was talking to Terry. Tell him the quote, Terry. Yell it out about Ralph Nader's quote. Scream it out. Scream it out.
Ralph Nader one time told me and several other people that our political system is one party divided by abortion.
That's an exaggeration. I've interviewed Ralph Nader 3 times. He's one of the most wonderful, incredible people as a journalist that I've interviewed. He's like right up there. Ramsey Clark, former Attorney General, Ralph Nader, 2 of the most incredible people I ever interviewed. And I've interviewed the Berrigans a lot. I mean, as a reporter, did all of that. But anyway, the point I'm trying to say between these two parties, the Republicans and the Democrats, okay, is that on issues that matter to us, there's no difference. There's no difference in these 2 groups. Do we want to abolish the Pentagon? Well, I hope so. Do we want to abolish prisons? I've been to a lot of them. None of them do anything to uplift the human spirit. Prisons are an utter and complete failure. They're unredeemable. The Pentagon is an utter and complete failure. They're unredeemable. The police, an utter failure. The 3 Ps, I want to abolish them all. Democrats and Republicans feel very enthusiastic about all 3 of the 3 Ps. So issues that we care about, that all involve violence to the human spirit, unbelievable violence to the human spirit, are not opposed by the Democrats or the Republicans. They're identical. That's not to say Biden might not be doing more, for fighting global warming than Trump might have. There are distinctions. I'm not blind to that. But on the issues that we care about the most, there's no distinction. I think I'm being told I got to stop. I'll make my last comment. So what we're up against now, with the combination of global warming and a military-industrial complex that's out of control, is the survival of creation. Not human. We are essentially the voices of reason, fighting against unbelievable odds. But believe me, and you need to tell people this, global warming cannot be stopped until we abolish war. Global warming cannot be stopped. The Pentagon has to cease to exist before we stop global warming. It's the most dangerous institution on planet Earth. And that's what Terry said at the end, or no, I forget who said it at the end, but said, Terry said it. I'll leave you my email address, anybody who wants to go to jail or prison. Now, I am putting out an invitation to jail or prison. Now, what's your email? Oh, my email address. It shows my, everybody teases me about it. pmtoneill@aol.com. P as in Patrick, M as in Michael, T as in Terrence, my good Catholic confirmation name, O'Neill, Oneill. Now, I am planning a special trip to prison. I've been arrested at the Pentagon 7 times. The only thing that happens to you when you get arrested at the Pentagon, you kneel down, you say the Lord's Prayer. Before you get to now and at the hour of our death, amen, you have handcuffs on. They take you to a little jail and release you pretty quickly. My wife and I have been arrested there, my daughters. That's right, and that's interesting. I'll tell this one last story. I always told my children, my 8 children, and by the way, the number one question you get as a dad of 8 children, anybody guess? Any women guess it? The question a dad gets from 8 children? Where's mom? Where's mom? But I told my wife, Mary, I really don't care how the kids do in school. I don't care what time they go to bed. She did. I said, these were the only 3 requirements I had. That you love one another, that you go to Mass with me on Sunday till you turn 18, and that you go to jail with me. I'm happy to say 5 of my kids have committed civil disobedience. I'm working on the whole group. But anyway, the way I want it, tomorrow is my 67th birthday. 3 years from today, I'll be 70. My goal is, and I'm giving you guys a lot of lead time, my goal is when I turn 70, I want 70 of my friends to join me and my 8 children and my wife to get arrested at the Pentagon. So put it on your calendar, March 27th, 2026. Go to jail with Patrick and his family. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. A quick announcement. I wanted to correct myself misspeaking earlier. I also wanted to give recognition where it's due to Merritt Moore as also one of the co-founders of the Citizens Climate Lobby. I have one more speaker to introduce. It is with great honor that I introduce Mari Inoue. Solidarity is one of the hallmarks of the anti-nuclear movement. It comes from the rightful recognition that we are all responsible for our country's nuclear policies and the atrocities like Hiroshima and Nagasaki, for the Trinity test, for the tests at the Rocky Flats, for the tests at the Marshall Islands, for the abuse of the uranium miners in America as well as the Congo, and that we have a responsibility to support and advance the Treaty of the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, which Mara Inoue is an expert on. We are honored that Mara has accepted our invitation and that she has traveled from New York City to be with her. Let's give her a big warm welcome to Mara.
Thank you very much for inviting me. Thank you to organizers, coordinators. It's a great honor to be here. My name is Mari Inoue. I'm a co-founding member of Manhattan Project for Nuclear-Free World, which started 11 years ago, 1-year anniversary of Fukushima Daiichi nuclear disaster. We work for to eliminate nuclear weapons and nuclear energy, and we collaborate with groups, environmental groups, peace groups, anti-nuclear groups here in the U.S. as well as in Japan and beyond. So let me start by talking about the past. The Manhattan Project started officially in 1942, but the agencies leading up to the project were formed in 1939, and Columbia University received funding to do the uranium research. And there are a couple of notable places in Manhattan, New York City, and also other parts of New York City. For example, the photo in the middle is a former uranium storage site in Staten Island, where uranium from the Shinkolobwe uranium mine in the Belgium Congo was stored between 1939 to 1942. The photo in the right is a statue of the Buddhist monk. This statue survived the Hiroshima bombing. It was very close to the hypercenter, but this statue was donated to the Japanese temple in 1950. And the photo in the left, that's Robert Oppenheimer, a leading scientist of the Manhattan Project, used to live. And I highly recommend visiting these places when you have a chance to visit New York City. So uranium mines, without mining uranium, you cannot build nuclear bombs. So 2/3 of uranium for the Manhattan Project came from the Shinkolobwe uranium mine, which is now the Democratic Republic of the Congo, where you see the red dot in the map. 1/6 of the uranium came from El Dorado mine in Canada, where you see the word Canada. That's where the uranium mine was. And the rest of the uranium came from the United States. And there are 3 major operation centers. Oak Ridge enriched uranium, Hanford produced plutonium, Los Alamos built the bombs and conducted the first nuclear testing at the Trinity site in New Mexico on July 16, 1945. But the community impacted by the fallout from the first nuclear testing is not recognized as nuclear victims, even now. So Hanford nuclear site built the B reactor, which is the world's first nuclear reactor that produced plutonium to create Nagasaki bomb and also the bomb used in the New Mexico. So a nuclear reactor has a very violent origin. It was generating electricity was secondary purpose. Nuclear reactor was produced to build the bomb to kill civilians during the war. And Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombings killed more than 210,000 people. More than 150,000 people were injured. Tens of thousands of people were exposed to the radiation. And right now there are about 120,000 atomic bomb survivors in Japan as well as outside Japan. And the photo on the right is the photo of the St. Mary's Cathedral, which was one of the tallest cathedral in the East at that time, which was very close to the hypercenter and destroyed. That was not reserved. It was reconstructed and remodeled, as you can see at the lower photo. So in order to understand the humanitarian consequences of nuclear weapons, the best way is to listen to the testimonies of those survivors. We have Manhattan Project for Nuclear Free World has a YouTube channel, and we post their testimonies. Second and third generations atomic bomb survivors also send us testimonies. And we put English subtitles. And I also have drawings by atomic bomb survivors, so if you're interested in taking a look, please find me after this presentation. So nuclear testing. So the Manhattan Project was succeeded by the Atomic Energy Commission, and United States conducted more than 1,000 nuclear tests, both atmospheric and underground tests, in mainland as well as in the Pacific, in the Marshall Islands and Kiribati. The largest nuclear testing in the Pacific was the Castle Bravo test on March 1st, 1954, and it was 1,000 times the force of the Hiroshima bomb. And nuclear testing in the Pacific impacted Japanese fishing crews. Hundreds of Japanese fishing boats were catching tuna, bonito, and other fish in the Pacific, and they are not informed about the testing. So we also have testimonies of fishing crews who are and their family members who are impacted by the fallout. And I also have the testimonies of those fishing crews here. So if you're interested, let me know. So I'm not going to talk in details about the pattern of the atomic cover-up, but soon after Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombings, the cover-up and trivializing the health impacts continued even after the nuclear testing in the Pacific. And in 1955, United States and Japan promoted so-called atoms for peace on nuclear energy. And as a result, nuclear power plants are built in rural communities with limited resources, such as in Fukushima. And the Fukushima nuclear disaster started in March 2011. So now, 12 years have passed, but Japan is still in a state of nuclear emergency. Tens of thousands of people are still displaced. Hundreds of Fukushima children are already diagnosed with thyroid cancer. And Japan now plans to dump 1.3 million metric tons of radioactive wastewater from this damaged nuclear power plant into the Pacific Ocean, starting from this summer, and they say that it could last at least 3 decades or more. After the Fukushima disaster, what they did was they relaxed the food safety standard, and there was a huge outcry from the human rights organizations, physicians organizations, and finally, it took about 2 years to implement, but they were able to achieve stricter safety standard implemented in Japan. So the dumping plan, this is problematic because they have radioactivity inside the treated water. They said that they're going to use this filtering system, but they cannot eliminate tritium, radioactive hydrogen, or radioactive carbon-14 at all, and there will be another radioactive isotopes remain in the water. And United Nations human rights experts said that such dumping imposes considerable risks to the full enjoyment of human rights of concerned populations in and beyond the border of Japan. But United States and International Atomic Energy Agency support Japan's dumping plan. As we can see in the ongoing situation in Ukraine, nuclear reactors could impose considerable impact in the region, even if we don't use nuclear weapons. So nuclear reactors are pre-deployed weapons that could cause severe radioactive fallouts in the region. So next, I'd like to talk about inspiring activism and advocacy efforts by affected communities. The first, atomic bomb sufferers, they established their support group in 1956. It's like 11 years after the bombings. It took this long because Japan was occupied by United States until 1952. But nuclear testing in the Pacific in 1954 ignited them to organize, and they called for abolition of nuclear weapons while calling for state compensation for the victims of that atomic bombings. And 1 year after the establishment of this support group, they were able to achieve the atomic bomb sufferers medical care law, which was not adequate at the time, so they continued pressuring the Japanese government, and this law was amended more than several times in order to meet the demands and the needs of nuclear victims. Another notable development came 2 years ago when 84 plaintiffs in Hiroshima finally recognized as black rain victims. They were in the 80s, and they kept fighting in court. And the judge said that it is sufficient to prove that the possibility of damage to their health due to atomic bomb radiation cannot be ruled out. Nagasaki black rain victims are still fighting in court. Another notable law that I like to share is a Radiation Exposure Compensation Act, which was provided to those downwinders infected by the nuclear fallout from the nuclear testing here in the U.S. This law came in 1990 as an expeditious, low-cost alternative to litigation, and it doesn't require claimants to establish causation as long as they can establish that they are diagnosed with one of the designated diseases, and also as long as they can establish that they either work or reside in a designated location for the specific period of time. Another notable advocacy efforts was after the Chernobyl nuclear disaster, which happened in 1986, and local scientists created a radiation map based on the soil measurement of radioactivity. The map was not disclosed to the leadership until 1989 because I heard that a nuclear industry was suppressing this information. But because of the map, the law on social protection of citizens exposed to radiation due to the disaster at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant was established 5 years after the disaster. And they codified some of the economic and social measures to people based on where they lived and the level of the contamination. They even have, in Ukraine, they have an online radiation monitoring sites where you can go to and see what's going on there. This is an air monitoring site, and it's so small, but the one on the upper right, that's the graph of radiation spike on February 25th, 2022, one day after the Russian forces occupied Chernobyl nuclear power plant. And there was, we were able to find this because this radiation monitoring data was published online. And this Chernobyl contamination map that was created after Chernobyl disaster inspired Japanese mothers, Fukushima mothers, and they conducted soil measurements. More than 4,000 volunteers were involved in collecting more than 3,400 samples, soil samples, in 17 prefectures. And this is outside the evacuation zone. And I brought the booklet as well. So if you're interested in taking a look, I'll be here. And based on the soil measurements, they were able to calculate the radiation level at the time of the accident. And based on that, they were able to calculate what the radiation level will be 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, even 100 years from the disaster. And there are other radiation measurement laboratories led by people established in northeast Japan, and we have their voice messages on our YouTube channels, and their voices might be quite inspiring if you are interested in setting up such radiation measurement laboratories in your community. We also have testimonies of those affected by nuclear disasters. Those are also available on YouTube. Sorry about that. Oh, okay, I'll keep going. As Mary mentioned, one of the most inspiring developments is the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, which recognized the catastrophic humanitarian consequences of nuclear weapons, and also recognizing disproportionate impact on women and girls, also disproportionate impact on nuclear weapon activities on indigenous peoples. And one notable article in the TPNW is that Article 6, which talks about victim assistance and environmental remediation. which says that each state party shall provide age and gender-sensitive assistance, including medical care, rehabilitation, and psychological support, as well as provide for the social and economic inclusion for those members of communities impacted by nuclear use or testing. And I strongly believe that those affected communities under Article 6 should include those communities impacted by development and production and storage of nuclear weapons as well as radioactive waste. So we need to keep pushing because I think that treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons could be better. And one of the things that I co-organize in New York City is to send the thank you certificates and yellow roses to states parties that ratify the treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons, because they ratified the treaty regardless, even though nuclear armed states such as the United States pressure them not to do it. We also organized a rally in front of the New York Public Library calling for United States to join the treaty, and submitted this joined the treaty certificate to the U.S. mission to the UN, which is part of the State Department. So our next steps. Last year, the United Nations General Assembly declared that accessing to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment is a universal human right. And the United States voted in favor of this resolution. And this is not only the government, but also the corporations have to scale up their efforts to make sure that we can enjoy the healthy environment for all. So we have to demand this. Also, we have to divest from nuclear industries because they undermine democracy, which means that we have to move away our money from the financial institutions that invest in development and research on nuclear. Also, we talk about nuclear is not a climate solution because of what happened in Fukushima and Chernobyl. And this is the last slide, but once we are able to decommission nuclear plants and nuclear facilities, we need to focus efforts and resources on radioactive waste policies. We need to develop radioactive waste policies based on precautionary principle, meaning that do no harm, and humanitarian perspectives. We need to call for protecting the right to information. We need to call for transparent, inclusive, and equitable stakeholder engagement in all aspects of decision-making processes for those communities whose needs were underrepresented or excluded from traditional policy development. And finally, we need to be mindful that, as Mary said, no safe dose of ionizing radiation, and all exposures are cumulative, and some isotopes are extremely long-lived. So thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you so much for all your work to really bring forth the voices of people directly impacted across the globe. I think it really touches the hearts of so many of us. We're going to continue. I'm going to ask that we can just stick it out for another about 10 to 15 minutes. We're going to move on to questions. You can go ahead, if you haven't already given your questions to Joan, I'm going to ask her to come up to address with questions, particularly with the last three speakers we've had, but if there's any questions from earlier in the program, we're going to move on to those now. After that, I'm going to ask Ken Edwards and or Patrick O'Neill to give a benediction to close the event, and then we'll move on to food, social time, and open the mic up to any other comments that people want to make here at the event. So let's collect questions. And Joan, I see her walking around to take any questions. And the mic to her.
question for Erwin. Can you speak to the current policy in Japan as far as nuclear weapons goes? Have they banned nuclear weapons in Japan, or are they still manufacturing?
Thank you so much for that question. Unfortunately, Japanese government, the Prime Minister of Japan, Kishida, was elected from the Hiroshima district. And he talked about the importance of abolishing nuclear weapons. However, he's very loyal to the United States. So Japan does not sign or ratify the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. They plan to restart nuclear power plants, and now they're trying to be the perpetrator of the nuclear industry by dumping radioactive waste into the Pacific Ocean, ignoring the voices from those Pacific nations impacted by nuclear testing.
Ari?
Yeah.
Who thinks that Japan makes nuclear weapons? Please clarify.
But Japan doesn't, build nuclear weapons.
Right.
Yeah.
My question is simply that we hear that the nuclear arsenal needs to be refurbished, that it's in the process of being renewed. And I'm not sure what that means. Are those technically no new nuclear weapons? Is that within the nuclear proliferation idea? Or is refurbishing them, restoring them, whatever the word you want to use, is that outside the idea of the international treaty?
Very
As with so much to do with international law, it's kind of hard to say. But,
and I certainly want to hear from you too, Mari. The refurbishment, it is illegal. Let's start with TPNW, but let's also start with the Non-Proliferation Treaty. It is illegal to be rotating your stock, period. And it is illegal to be refurbishing, whatever we call it. And there's also some scientific and engineering opinion that suggests that we don't even need to be doing that if there is some justification for maintaining what we have. But it's basically contrary to international law, and I learned through bitter experience in 1999 that you can't be a United States citizen and sue your government to have some sort of determination by a court as to whether the United States is adhering to treaties.
It comes down to money again.
Always.
I want to ask this question, which is what suggestion do you have to join the TPNW? I believe that about the United States joining the TPNW. In order to sign, we need to pressure State Department. And in order to ratify, we need 2/3 of approval from the Senate. It's a lot of work. Yeah. But I think we can do it. We have to keep talking about this because we have affected communities in so many states in this country that are impacted by nuclear testing and development and production storage of nuclear weapons and also nuclear waste. If you include that, I think it covers more than 2/3 of this country.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
84 of the 100 senators voted for the Defense Appropriation Act. 84.
Even Bernie.
Oh, wow. F-35.
Any more questions? One up here and then one there.
So Oliver Stone has a movie that just came out, Nuclear Now, and supposed to talk about how we could use nuclear energy save the environment. Anyone have any comments on that or seen that?
That's insane.
Okay, you wanna take this one?
All right, the 30-second, take is nuclear power is too expensive, too experimental. We're talking small modular reactors, too next generation and too late to help us turn any corner. And I think the worst and most egregious thing that's happening with the cell job on small modular reactors is that it's sucking all of the resources that we definitely must have to make the transition.
I want to just add one little thing. I spent 28 years working for an organization based in Washington, D.C., basically in the role that if you ever saw any of the films about the Lord of the Rings, there's a moment where a man, a wizard, and 3 small hobbits are charging the gates of Moria. That's what we were doing. But I could never figure out who Frodo was and what we were buying time for until I heard from a friend who'd gone to work for the solar industry that they needed 5 more years. And I finally understood what we were doing. We were holding the line and pushing the line so that solar could become a competitive, I'm not a fan of capitalism, but it's what we got. And in capitalism, nuclear was cheaper than solar. And they needed 5 more years to hit that crossover. And we hit it before the year 2000, folks. Wind was already 5 times cheaper than nuclear. And I don't remember the year in the 90s, but we did the crossover. Solar is cheaper than new nuclear production. There is absolutely no reason to let your uncle or your nephew shame you into thinking that nuclear is the only answer. It is absolutely no answer except for the fact that it's shielding the idea that we have to have nuclear weapons.
Right.
Right.
Right on.
I just got solar at my home this past year, and I actually paying less money per month and generating solar as a result, paying less money than I was paying to the electric company. I'm now paying off the solar panel and saving money. So, encourage everybody to do it too.
Maybe it's already been said, but I was wondering what the next legal step is to the NRC about hearing. Is there another appeal or anything like that?
I'll bring the mic up to Terry, but ECAN has appealed their decision to deny the hearing.
It is presently on appeal to the 5 commissioners. I expect a decision probably by June, and I expect the decision to be the licensing panel decided correctly. Screw the citizens. You guys don't have you don't have a right. I also want to, one more 30-second tutorial is, if you get to trial before the NRC, it's unlike anything you've ever seen. We must write down all of our questions in advance of the hearing and submit them to the licensing board, which decides in its finite wisdom as to what questions they will ask the witnesses. They do not have to follow up. They don't have to, if I angrily scribble, ask Arnie Gunderson this then, damn it, they don't have to ask what I'm requesting. I've done a lot of trial law in a lot of years, and sometimes you are on the hunt. Sometimes you can, I hate to say it, smell blood. You know you're going to be able to just credit this witness and hurt them badly, hurt the other side badly. You can't do that. You have to submit your questions, and I have been in a couple of hearings now where I submitted questions and I'm like, beat red and you better, and the licensing board chair, who's the lawyer, looks at me and says, it doesn't say anything. No further questions. My witness is done.
And so the second question is should some of our protests, being arrested, all that,
be in front of the NRC headquarters and pulling down the regulatory people in addition to the other. I mean, they don't really, the public doesn't really know about them and just holds them up as, you know. I mean, is that something to,
I think there's an expert on civil disobedience.
I mean, is that a good strategy on that?
Yes, look, I'm not rejecting any possible strategies, and we can't. Things are getting worse. Things are getting more authoritarian. We are drifting toward a nuclear weapons crisis, and as Mr. O'Neill pointed out, America's sleepwalking. I have heard, I do a lot of anti-war proselytizing where I'm living, and people say, oh, don't take Putin that seriously, that's bluffing. Look, he's made this threat repeatedly and really hasn't lifted a finger, and people don't understand how this is going to play out. It isn't going to be Dr. Strangelove. It's going to be a theater scale weapon. And Russia has a lot of them, and the United States has the E-61-12 smart bomb. We have, and we're about to give F-16s to Ukraine, and the F-16 is eminently riggable to drop B-61-12 smart bombs. Nuclear weapons.
Yeah, on the topic of what can we do, what are the next steps, I'm going to hand the mic off to Terry Clark, who has a proposal.
I'll try to do this in 2 minutes. You know, can you hear me?
Yeah. I can hear you, but I can't see you.
Okay. This has been a great meeting, but I've been sitting here the past half hour and saying, well, we just got to let this die? About 50 people here meeting today. How about if we support a letter going to our various politicians, county commissioners, federal and state legislators, that 50 of us met today, point out a few of the points that were made as a next step. Does everybody support that?
Yeah.
That's all.
And to the licensing board also.
Yes, we'll make a list.
Yeah. Terry, ask for their.
Oh, and permission to put your name that you've listed. Is anybody, if you don't want your name listed, please let us know as you go out the door, okay?
Good, approved.
Yes, and also you have postcards at your table, that if you sign them, we have the postage, we will put it on there and get these mailed. One, the little greenish one is to the NRC chairperson, Christopher Hansen. He attended seminary, he is a person of faith, and so we are appealing to him to take a look at in prayerful support of ECAN's appeal, which is before you, so that he doesn't just think this is, another notice about the docket. So please sign it, we'll pay the postage, and then if you would like to, there are plenty more up here. Take them home to your circles and your spheres of influence. Right. Please.
About the other postcards.
The other postcards are to the President of the United States. He has a quote, "The United States does not need new nuclear weapons." That's to remind him that he said that and hold him to his words. The other one being to the Department of Energy, which we have at 1 in 71 statistic, but let's also note for women it's 1 in 23 and girls 1 in 10. We will be doing a benediction before we close this formal part of the public hearing.
I just want to say, if you take any of those large postcards and mail them, you have to use the first class.
Bucky?
Regular forever stamp.
I would just like to announce that Publix is providing more refreshments, and we'd really like to talk with you. If you have a question that has not been answered, or if you want to make connections with someone, we understand networking is important. So if there are more refreshments coming, we have the library until 6 o'clock, and I hope that you will mingle and become acquainted with each other. Let's build a network.
Comment.
Comment was made that has been read, the comment was the rhetorical question, have we built nuclear power plants that are safe from the insanity of war? No.
Second consideration. So let us bow our heads in gratitude and thanksgiving for this wonderful day of life on this beautiful spring day in Johnson City, Tennessee. And God, we thank you for bringing all of us together prayerfully and with hope that we can set the course of creation, the creation that you gifted us with, on a course to survival, for human survival, but for survival of all of our creation. And we just ask that you empower us with your grace, mercy, and love, that we may make decisions fearlessly, hopefully, and sincerely to make your creation a better place and a safer place for future generations. We pray this prayer to God, the author of life, the Prince of Peace. And I end with a quote from Maury Schwartz, which I loved in Tuesdays with Maury. Love is the only rational act. Amen.
Thank you all for being here. Thank you for this wonderful event. Please help yourselves to some refreshments and food. If anybody wants to add their own voice any further, make a comment, the mic is now open.